Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 22nd, 1991, 11:30 p.m. It's an ordinary summer night in the city. For officers Rolf Miller and Robert Roth, it's the start of another routine patrol shift. Windows down, radio static low. Out of nowhere, a man stumbles into view, shirtless, barefoot, a handcuff dangling from one wrist, drenched in sweat, panic in his eyes. He's frantic, his voice trembles, words spill out too fast. He tells the officers about an apartment, about a freak who tried to kill him. The officers exchange a glance, cautious and skeptical. But the situation is just too odd to be ignored. They decide to trust him and go take a look. Minutes later, the three of them arrive at the back of the Oxford Apartments, Unit 213. The hallway is silent, the air strangely still. The door creaks open. A pale man with yellow eyes answers, soft-spoken, almost too calm. The officers ask about the handcuff. He admits to having put it on the man as a lover's game, but the man fiercely denies it. Officer Roth tells him to stay quiet and asks the other man for the key. He says the key is in the bedroom and turns to get it. As he starts to close the door behind him, Officer Miller blocks it with his foot. "We'll come with you," he says. There's a flicker of hesitation. The man pauses, then slowly steps aside, letting them in. Inside, the air is thick with a rancid odor, something foul and chemical. The officers flinch at the stench. One of them even comments on it, asking what could possibly smell so foul. The man offers a casual excuse, something about spoiled meat or plumbing issues. The officers nod, but their expressions say otherwise. The man tries to step toward the bedroom to get the key, but both officers tell him to step aside. Officer Rolf Mueller will handle it. The man obeys hesitantly. Once inside, the officer finds the key, but a slightly ajar drawer catches his eye. He opens it. He can't believe his eyes. Dozens of Polaroids depicting dismembered bodies. All of them have been taken in that same bedroom. He calls for his partner. The man tries to fight to escape, but he's quickly wrestled and pinned to the floor by the two officers. As Officer Rolf Miller snaps the handcuffs on, he mutters, "For what I did, I should be dead." The officers didn't know it yet, but they had just discovered one of the darkest cases in American crime. And the man who had flagged them down was the only one who lived to tell the story. His name was Tracy Edwards, the sole survivor of the man the world would come to know as the Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer.
A 31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer entered the world on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By 1966, the family had relocated to Ohio, where Jeffrey spent most of his formative years. His mother, Joyce, was a fragile woman, prone to anxiety and explosive outbursts. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, logical, detached, often buried in his work. Their marriage was a slow-motion collapse, a constant hum of arguments that filled the home like static. Young Jeffrey, sensitive and observant, observed it all. Even as a child, Dahmer didn't behave like other kids. While boys his age played baseball or rode bikes, he wandered alone in the woods near his home, searching for dead animals. His father once showed him how to dissolve chicken bones in acid, a harmless science trick, he thought, but for Jeffrey it unlocked a new layer of fascination. He collected bones, preserved the remains in jars, and observed the way bodies came apart. By adolescence, the isolation set in. High school was a nightmare of invisibility. Dahmer was the quiet, awkward boy who never quite fit in. He drank heavily, sneaking liquor into class, showing up buzzed or outright drunk. The other kids avoided him. Teachers either didn't notice or didn't care, but the alcohol loosened something inside him, and when it hit, his behavior shifted into the bizarre. In the middle of class, he'd suddenly bark like an animal or mimic people with disabilities. His classmates called it doing a Dahmer. They laughed, thought it was just a strange act from the drunken weirdo in the back row. But it wasn't just an act. It was a mask that distracted from the storm building underneath, where urges and obsessions were already taking root. At home, the fights between his parents grew louder, more violent. Then the final blow, divorce. His mother took his younger brother and left. His father rented a motel room and left too. Jeffrey was alone, and something inside him was already rotting. Jeffrey Dahmer had just graduated high school, 18 years old, alone in the family home. His mother was gone, his father was absent, his little brother taken away. For the first time in his life, Jeffrey was completely alone, and no one seemed to notice. He drove his father's Chevy Nova aimlessly through the back roads of Ohio, lost in his own thoughts that had been festering for years, dark, obsessive, and violent. And then he saw him. A hitchhiker, long hair, headed to a concert. His name was Stephen Hicks, 19 years old. Jeffrey slowed down, pulled over, asked if he wanted a ride, offered him a few beers and said they could hang out for a bit at his place before Stephen went on his way. He agreed and entered the car. Back at the house, they drank, listened to music, laughed even. For a brief moment, Jeffrey felt a connection. It was rare, it was fragile, and he didn't want it to end. But it did. After a couple of hours, Stephen stood up, said it was time to go, and something inside Jeffrey broke. The warmth drained from his face, the silence grew heavy, that feeling returned, the one he couldn't bear. The fear of abandonment, the fear of being alone again. As Stephen turned to walk away, Jeffrey grabbed a barbell from the floor. Without warning, he struck him in the head. Then, with the same barbell, he strangled him. He dragged Hicks' body into the basement, the same space where, as a boy, he had once boiled the flesh of animal bones and left it there overnight, letting the reality of what he'd done sink in. The next day, he disposed of the body. He dissolved flesh in acid, crushed bones with a sledgehammer, scattered the remains in the woods behind the property. By the time his father returned days later, there was no trace left. No one suspected a thing. Jeffrey Dahmer sat in the back of a classroom, reeking of bourbon. He had enrolled at Ohio State University just months after scattering Stephen Hicks' remains in the woods. On paper, it was a fresh start. In reality, he was a ghost. He skipped classes, drowned himself in liquor, and didn't even bathe regularly. His dorm roommate eventually moved out, repulsed by the empty bottles. By winter, he was gone, flunked out, unnoticed. His father, frustrated, had pulled him out of college and pushed him into the army. For a brief moment, it looked like the military might straighten him out. The rigid routine, the forced sobriety, the sense of order. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Once deployed to West Germany, the old urges came crawling back. He smuggled liquor into the barracks, drank himself into blackouts, and frequently showed up to duty hungover or completely intoxicated. Fellow soldiers reported that he was erratic, inappropriate. Some would later accuse him of drugging and assaulting them while they slept. His superiors found him slumped over in uniform, breaking off schnapps, failing at even the most basic tasks. Eventually, the army had seen enough. In March 1981, just 2 years after enlisting, Dahmer was discharged under the label unsuitability due to his persistent alcohol abuse. They gave him a plane ticket and sent him home. No report, no red flags, no follow-up. And once again, he slipped through the cracks. No college degree and no military career. Dahmer drifted to Miami Beach. He found work at a sandwich shop and rented a room at a cheap motel, but most of his paycheck went straight into the bottle. When he couldn't keep up with the rent, he was kicked out, spending nights on the beach, drinking himself into oblivion. Shortly after, he called his father and asked for help, so he returned back to Ohio. Just weeks later, he was arrested for indecent exposure after being found drunk in public. By 1982, Dahmer was back in Milwaukee, living in his grandmother's basement. The walls seemed to close in around him, the silence broken only by the clink of bottles and the whispers in his mind. Drinking no longer dulled the urges, it made them stronger. The fantasies returned, darker, more vivid. That summer, he was arrested at the Wisconsin State Fair for exposing himself in front of a crowd that included children. 4 years later, in 1986, 2 boys spotted him by the Kinnickinnic River, masturbating in broad daylight. Dahmer claimed he'd only been urinating, but police didn't believe him. He was arrested again, sentenced to probation, and ordered to attend counseling. Each arrest was a crack in the mask he wore in public. His private compulsions were spilling out, piece by piece. In 1987, while still living in his grandmother's basement in West Allis, Wisconsin, Dahmer picked up the 25-year-old, called Stephen Tuomi, at a gay bar. Their encounter took them to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where something went terribly wrong. Dahmer would later claim he had no memory of killing Stephen Tuomi, only of waking up in a hotel bed, naked with the man's body lying cold beside him. There was blood on his chest, bruising, a blank space where the knife should have been. He assumed he had beaten Tuomi to death in a drunken, uncontrollable rage. Panicked, Jeffrey went to a thrift store, bought the largest suitcase he could find. He stuffed Tuomi's corpse inside and called a taxi. The driver helped him lift the heavy suitcase into the trunk, never asking what was inside. He never knew his unit dragged 170 pounds of dead weight through the streets of Milwaukee. Back at his grandmother's house, he took the suitcase to the basement. And after a week, he decided to dismember the corpse to dispose of it, preserving only the skull for himself. Milwaukee in the early 90s was a city of contrasts. Blue-collar neighborhoods and thriving nightlife, but also pockets of neglect where people could vanish without raising alarms. By now, on his 30th birthday, Dahmer had moved out of his grandmother's house after living there for roughly 9 years. His grandma had kicked him out because she couldn't tolerate the awful smell that emerged from her basement, Jeffrey's severe alcohol addiction, and his suspicious activity, bringing men late at night anymore. So he moved to the Oxford Apartments, located at 924 North 25th Street. This is where most of his murders actually happened. He added a chilling ritual before his nights out, sleeping in a pair of yellow contact lenses. He idolized fictional killers with the same predatory gaze, Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars and the Gemini Killer from The Exorcist 3, and bowed the lenses to resemble them. In his mind, the transformation wasn't just cosmetic. It was a step deeper into the dark fantasy world where he was the hunter and everyone else was prey. He targeted young men, many black, many gay, many struggling with poverty or addiction, preying on those he knew the system would overlook. To him, they weren't human beings. They were objects, raw material for his grim and twisted plans. His apartment had become a slaughterhouse disguised as a bachelor's pad. The outside world saw a messy, unremarkable unit, but behind the door lay a labyrinth of horrors. A fridge stocked with body parts, chemicals and tools he used to dispose of his victims, a nightstand drawer full of Polaroids documenting atrocities, a blue 57-gallon drum with 3 torsos dissolving in acid, a black table he was planning to build an altar upon with his victims' skeletons and skulls.
I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
He'd lure men home with promises of money, alcohol, or companionship. Once inside, he'd offer a drug drink, watching as their eyelids fluttered, their bodies began to fail. Then, with chilling precision, he would strangle them, often deriving a disturbing sense of pleasure as he felt the life slip away. Some body parts he ate, convinced cannibalism would bind his victims to him forever. He even tried creating zombies, drilling holes into living victims' skulls and injecting acid, attempting to reduce them to compliant, mindless companions. By 1991, Dahmer was killing almost weekly. Neighbors complained about loud noises, power tools at odd hours, and an unbearable stench of rot. But when police came, they shrugged it off. Just a weird guy, they said. Then came one of the most shocking failures, the most gruesome act of police negligence. A 14-year-old boy named Konorak Synthesomphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, drugged, bleeding, barely able to stand. 2 neighbors, Sandra Smith and her cousin Nicole Childress, spotted him on the street and called 911, begging officers to help. Dahmer returned from the street to find the boy outside with the women. When police officers John Bolsersak and Joseph Govers arrived, Sandra and Nicole pleaded with them not to let Dahmer take him back. But Dahmer was calm. He told officers it was just a lover's quarrel, that the boy was his 19-year-old boyfriend who was just too drunk. Despite his dazed state, despite the women's pleas, despite the boy's childish appearance, the officers believed him. One of them told Nicole to shut the hell up when she tried to convince them not to do so. They escorted the boy back into Dahmer's apartment and left. If they only would have checked the bedroom, they would have found the body of Tony Hughes, murdered just 2 days earlier.
They were in the apartment. They were actually in the apartment, and there was a dead young man in the bedroom on the floor. I couldn't believe it when it turned out that they didn't see anything. I couldn't believe it.
They left and then called in the dispatcher.
The intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend, and we're be a minute. My partner's gonna get deloused at the station.
Glenda Cleveland, Sandra's mother and Nicole's aunt, had also been notified of the incident by her daughter and niece, so she called the police repeatedly, insisting the boy was in danger.
Milwaukee Police?
Yes, there was a squad car, number 68, that was flagged down earlier this evening, about 15 minutes ago.
That was me.
What happened? I mean, my daughter and my niece witnessed what was going on. Was anything done about the situation?
No, it's the intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
Are you sure?
Ma'am, I can't make it any more clear. It's all taken care of.
Just 30 minutes after they left, the boy was already dead. And what makes this case even worse is that just 3 years earlier, in September 1988, Dahmer had been arrested for sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy, Samsak Synthesomphone, Konorak's older brother. He was sentenced to 5 years but released after serving only 10 months. Jeffrey Dahmer met Tracy Edwards at the Grand Avenue Mall and lured him home. They arrived at the back way of the Oxford apartments. Inside there was a foul odor, but Jeffrey said it was due to a broken sewer pipe. They were sitting on the couch doing casual conversation, until Jeffrey started talking about his fish tank, which made Tracy turn his head to take a look at it. At that moment, Tracy felt something. All of a sudden, a handcuff and a knife had been pulled on him, and Jeffrey had shifted his demeanor from a friendly and cool guy to a cold, threatening presence who told Tracy that if he wouldn't do what he said, he would kill him. Dahmer guided Tracy to the bathroom, where he saw a mattress with strange stains, a TV that was playing The Exorcist 3 movie, and a suspicious blue drum sitting in the corner. Then Dahmer ordered him to sit on the bed and take his shirt and shoes off, but despite all of that, Tracy stayed calm, following every order and playing along with Jeffrey, whose behavior became unpredictable, shifting from friendly calmness to aggressive dominance while he watched the movie. He even told Tracy at some point that he didn't want people to leave or abandon him. After a couple of hours getting more dominant and aggressive, Dahmer told Tracy to lay face down on the floor with his hands behind his back, but Tracy, afraid to get completely handcuffed, didn't do it. Saying this, Dahmer rested his head on Tracy's chest, saying he'd listen to the heartbeat, then threatened, "I'm going to eat your heart out of your chest." Realizing something was about to happen, Tracy tried to get some space by telling Dahmer he needed to use the bathroom. Dahmer guided him there, pointing his knife at Tracy every moment. Back at the bedroom, Tracy kept playing along, looking for an opportunity to escape. Shifting his behavior again, Dahmer even started talking about how no one cared for him. So Tracy kept acting friendly, and planning his next move, asked him for a beer. Also told him he wanted to sit in the living room because of the air conditioner. So they went back to the couch, where the conversation continued with Dahmer's strange behavior shifting. After a while, Dahmer got a little distracted with the drinking, so Tracy, seizing the opportunity he had spent the last hours looking for, stood up slowly, and in a fast movement he punched Dahmer in the face, who tried to grab him, but Tracy was faster, and he managed to bolt out the door, miraculously escaping. He ran barefoot into the street, his cuff still clamped, begging to find someone who could help him. At 11:30 p.m., he flagged down a police cruiser driven by officers Robert Roth and Rolf Miller, explaining a freak had tried to kill him. The officers followed him back to the apartment. Jeffrey calmly answered the door and admitted he'd cuffed Tracy. They entered the apartment, despite Dahmer was hesitant to let them do so. In the bedroom, Officer Miller saw something far worse than a handcuff key. It was a stack of Polaroid photos depicting dismembered bodies posed like dolls. He froze. These are for real. Within moments, they pinned Dahmer to the floor and placed him in handcuffs for attempted murder. In that hallway, Tracy Edwards stood with a handcuff dangling from his wrist and his heart pounding, as he fully grasped what had just happened. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. The whole nation knew the man who had become synonymous with nightmares. Police sealed the area and investigators took every single type of proof from Dahmer's apartment, including the blue barrel with the 3 torsos inside, the fridge with the heads, a huge pot and boxes full of human bones and genitals. In the coming days, the full scope emerged. 17 victims, spanning 1978 to 1991. The nation recoiled, but for Milwaukee's ignored communities it was validation. Proof their warnings had been brushed aside too long. As investigators peeled back layers of neglect, missing persons reports filed and forgotten, neighbors' complaints dismissed, the question lingered. How many lives could have been saved if someone had looked closer, sooner? Dahmer's arrest didn't just end his spree, it exposed the cracks in the system that let monsters hide in plain sight. On January 30, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer's trial opened in the Milwaukee County Courthouse. The gallery overflowed with reporters, victims' families, and curious onlookers. Dahmer had already confessed everything to police: the murders, the dismemberment, even cannibalism. The facts weren't in doubt. The trial wasn't about whether he had killed, it was about whether he was legally sane. The defense argued he was driven by uncontrollable urges, incapable of stopping himself. They brought in psychiatrists who described his paraphilias, his need for control, and his compulsions. But the prosecution countered with evidence of planning. The sedatives, the photographs, the hiding of bodies, the way he had fooled police when Konarak was found by the two girls outside his apartment. This, they said, wasn't insanity, it was calculation. On February 15, 1992, the jury rejected the insanity plea. They found Jeffrey Dahmer legally sane and guilty on all 15 Wisconsin counts of murder. 2 days later, on February 17, 1992, Judge Lawrence Graham delivered the sentence: 15 consecutive life terms, a total of 957 years. Later that year, Dahmer received a 16th life sentence from Ohio for his first victim, Stephen Hicks. That's how the heavy iron doors of Columbia Correctional Institution clanged shut behind Jeffrey Dahmer in 1992, sealing him away from the world he had terrorized. May 10th, 1994. An annular solar eclipse begins to dim the North American sky. In South Africa, after 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela takes the oath as the nation's first black president, ending the rule of apartheid in the country. Far away from there, on the other side of the world, in Illinois at the Stateville Correctional Center, John Wayne Gacy, an infamous serial killer who took the lives of 33 young men, is executed by lethal injection. And 249 kilometers away from there, in Wisconsin, inside the chapel of Columbia Correctional Institution, Jeffrey Dahmer emerges from the water of a steel basin. Having declared his conversion to Christianity, he had been baptized by Minister Roy Ratcliffe.
I am accountable to the Lord Jesus Christ. He'll be my final judge.
Can your sins be forgiven?
The Lord Jesus Christ's shed blood is powerful enough to wipe out even my sins.
November 28, 1994. The morning had begun like any other, with the routines of prison life, grim and predictable. But by mid-morning, something broke the silence. A sudden alarm shrieked through the cell blocks, boots thundered down concrete hallways. Guards rushed toward the prison gym. Inside the gym's bathroom, 2 men lay sprawled on the blood-slicked tile. One was Jesse Anderson, convicted of murdering his wife. The other, his skull caved in, his glasses shattered, and no vital signs, was Jeffrey Dahmer. Standing over them was Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate and convicted murderer with a history of severe mental illness. In his hands, he held a 20-inch metal bar, torn from a piece of exercise equipment. When guards restrained him and asked why, Scarver said simply, "God told me to do it." 16 years earlier, Dahmer had taken his very first life using a barbell, striking Stephen Hicks in the head with brutal force. Now, in the final chapter of his story, Dahmer had met exactly the same fate. Christopher Scarver, the inmate who killed Dahmer, later explained his reasons. He said Dahmer would mock others in the prison cafeteria by shaping his food into severed limbs and pouring ketchup to mimic blood, boasting about his crimes. To fellow inmates, these weren't harmless pranks, they were taunts, grotesque reminders of what Dahmer had done. And for some, they crossed a line that could not be ignored. To Scarver, who was deeply religious and believed God spoke directly to him, this behavior was not only cruel but also hypocritical, especially from a man who had recently been baptized and claimed to have found faith. Scarver said he felt Dahmer was unrepentant, still reveling in the horrors of his past, and that this convinced him he was carrying out God's will when he struck. To many who watched Dahmer's time in prison, his death felt almost inevitable. Some later debated whether this was subconscious self-punishment, a man so consumed by guilt that he engineered his own execution. Even his father, Lionel, admitted he sometimes wondered if Jeff's reckless behavior in prison was no accident at all. if deep down his son wanted to die.